Welcome to Kindred History, where we revive the stories of remarkable women who changed the world. In this episode, we travel to 17th century Central Africa, where one extraordinary ruler stood against one of the most powerful empires of her time. Her name was Queen Nzinga, diplomat, strategist, warrior, nation builder. For nearly 40 years, she resisted Portuguese expansion, defended her people from the slave trade, and built a kingdom strong enough to challenge colonial power. Now, let us step back into history and begin. Nzinga Mbande was born around 1583 in the kingdom of Ndongo, in what is now modern-day Angola. Her father, King Kilwanji Kia Samba, ruled during a turbulent period when Portuguese traders and soldiers were pushing inland from the Atlantic coast in search of territory and enslaved labor. From an early age, Nzinga showed unusual intelligence and confidence. She was educated in diplomacy, politics, and languages, and often accompanied her father during court discussions and negotiations with foreign envoys. These experiences shaped the young princess. She learned how power moved through alliances, negotiation, and strength. According to oral traditions, the name Nzinga refers to the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck at birth, a sign believed to mark a child destined for greatness. Few could have imagined just how true that belief would become. By the early 17th century, the Portuguese presence in Angola had grown increasingly aggressive. Their ambitions were clear: expand colonial territory, control trade routes, and capture Africans to supply the rapidly expanding transatlantic slave trade. The kingdom of Ndongo stood directly in their path. Years of warfare followed between Ndongo and Portuguese forces. Villages were raided. Thousands were captured and enslaved. Political pressure intensified across the region. Nzinga watched these conflicts closely. She understood that survival would require both military resistance and political strategy. In 1622, Nzinga's brother, King Nzinga Mbande, sent her as his ambassador to negotiate peace with the Portuguese governor in the colonial capital of Luanda. It was an extraordinary moment. A woman representing an African kingdom in high-level diplomatic negotiations with a European colonial power. But the Portuguese intended to humiliate her. When Nzinga entered the meeting chamber, a chair had been placed for the governor. None had been provided for her. The message was clear. They expected her to sit on the floor. Nzinga refused to accept this insult. Instead, she instructed one of her attendants to kneel beside her and form a human chair. Nzinga sat upon the attendant's back and addressed the governor at eye level. The message was unmistakable. She would negotiate as an equal. That single act became one of the most famous symbols of dignity and resistance in African diplomatic history. Political tensions soon shook the kingdom of Ndongo. King Nzinga Mbande died in 1624 under circumstances that remain debated by historians. Amid growing instability, Nzinga took the throne. Her rule began at a moment of extreme crisis. Portuguese armies were advancing inland. Regional rivals threatened her authority, and the slave trade was devastating communities across Central Africa. Nzinga responded with determination. She reorganized the kingdom's leadership and prepared for a long struggle for survival. Nzinga proved herself not only as a ruler but as a military leader. She reorganized her forces and adopted flexible guerrilla tactics that allowed her armies to move swiftly through forests and rivers. Rather than meeting Portuguese troops in predictable battles, Nzinga struck unexpectedly and withdrew before the enemy could respond. Her leadership inspired fierce loyalty among her followers. Warriors, refugees, and former captives rallied to her cause. Many joined her army in the hope of resisting enslavement and reclaiming their freedom. Eventually, Nzinga expanded her influence beyond Ndongo and established her authority over the neighboring kingdom of Matamba. Matamba became the center of her power. From there, she built a resilient political state capable of resisting Portuguese expansion for decades. Her kingdom became a refuge for those fleeing the slave trade. Communities displaced by war found protection within her territory. Under Nzinga's leadership, Matamba developed into one of the most powerful African states in the region. Nzinga understood that warfare alone could not secure her kingdom's future. She pursued alliances wherever they strengthened her position. She forged partnerships with neighboring African leaders and later allied with the Dutch when they challenged Portuguese control along the Atlantic coast. She also corresponded with European missionaries and diplomats, sometimes adopting Christianity as part of diplomatic negotiations. But beneath these shifting strategies, her objective remained constant: protect the sovereignty of her people. For nearly 4 decades, Queen Nzinga challenged Portuguese expansion in Central Africa. Few rulers of the 17th century sustained resistance for so long. Even Portuguese officials recognized her intelligence, determination, and political skill. She proved that African states could organize, adapt, and challenge European colonial ambitions long before the height of imperial expansion. Her resistance delayed Portuguese domination of the region and reshaped the balance of power across Central Africa. In her later years, Nzinga gradually shifted her focus toward diplomacy and stabilizing her kingdom. She pursued peace agreements that allowed her people to rebuild after decades of conflict. By the time of her death in 1663, she had ruled for nearly 40 years. Few rulers of her era left behind a legacy of such endurance. Her leadership had reshaped the political landscape of Central Africa. Queen Nzinga remains one of the most revered figures in African history. In Angola, she is celebrated as a national hero and symbol of resistance. A powerful statue of Queen Nzinga stands today in the capital city of Luanda, overlooking the nation she helped defend. Her legacy is honored through literature, theater, and national commemorations that remember the struggle against colonial domination. Across Angola and the African diaspora, she represents courage, resilience, and the enduring fight for sovereignty and dignity. More than 3 centuries later, her story continues to inspire historians, artists, and leaders around the world. Queen Nzinga's life reminds us that leadership can emerge in moments of profound crisis. She confronted empire with strategy. She answered invasion with resistance, and she defended her people with unwavering determination. Her story is not simply one of war. It is a story of courage, diplomacy, and the unbreakable will to remain free. Through forest paths her armies came, against the tide of steel and flame. No throne of gold could match her will, no empire bend her spirit still. Through storm and war her legend grew, a queen the world at last now knew. If Queen Nzinga's story inspired you, subscribe and share this video with others. Tell us where you are watching from and which forgotten historical figure we should awaken next. Join us as we awaken the past, one story at a time.